right, opening the meeting of the Property Committee, January 10, 2019. Was there any minutes from?
Should have been, but I did not send them in.
Okay.
So next time we meet,
We'll
I'll
have
have
those.
two meetings worth of minutes.
Excellent. Basically, we had two items on the agenda. One was a general kind of search of the property in the city, and we have some talk about that, but we can maybe do that afterwards. We have Jeff Bagg with us today and Jim Ramsey from the Park Department, and love to hear the proposals that we have regarding the dog park possibility in the city of Easthampton. As I understand it, we have the possibility of having a grant from the Stanton Foundation that is offering monies to municipalities who apply. Up to 10 municipalities are selected each year. The plan is that they'll do that in this year, so the earlier one gets in an application, I understand that makes sense, and then they cut it off and hopefully reopen again the following year. Generally, this sort of thing comes, I think, with a few more folks and committees, and I don't know if anyone else has been working on this in terms of groups and people that are interested in spearheading the charge. It's always good to have, I mean, when the bike path and the bike trails came in, there is the volunteer group that held that together.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this somewhat akin to the rail trail group in that there, unless the city has funds to do maintenance and disposal of things like trash and to do other things, it's going to be helpful, I think, to have that group. And it's always good to have a group to kind of monitor that is working together, I would think. I understand that there are at least 8 of these in the state of Massachusetts now. There may be, in fact, more.
When we say 8, do you mean 8 Stanton?
8 Stanton
Yeah,
parks.
okay, because there's definitely more.
Yeah, there's more dog parks, yeah. And it sounds like an interesting possibility for the city. Certainly, I'm sure the public will have lots of questions, but I'm not sure there was a lot of attention yet in terms of articles. I know that the Gazette was hoping to put something out tomorrow. I was hoping that they'd have it out before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be premature.
Just to get a few folks through and interested.
Yeah, so I mean, so this
I know
is,
you had made the submission and had conversations with Jeff.
yes, so for the purpose of public record, so this was brought to me actually by Police Chief Alberti and Sergeant Scrivener. We had a discussion probably, so if you and I met in November, it was
October.
It was October probably. So I spoke to them about it. I've wanted a dog park here for years. I used to walk my dogs actually on what is now Treehouse when that was an empty field with trails through it, and that was a great dog location. You know, or there's the dog park in Northampton as well, but we don't really have a municipally available dog walking area, and there's a lot of obviously residents in the city who own dogs. So the chief and the sergeant brought this to me and let me know about these grants, which I had no idea existed. And so I then initiated a meeting with Planner Bagg to talk about this more. And we had the opportunity then to meet with myself, Jeff Bagg, Chief Alberti, Sergeant Scribner, and John Mason to have a preliminary discussion, which is kind of outlined a little bit in the action items here on this great memo that Jeff put together. And so there's a bunch of things here which I could address, and I'm happy to, but the most important thing first in terms of moving this forward is to try to select some potential sites. Once that's done, we would need to look into money for preliminary designs, for submission, for the design process of the grant. And Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong here at all with anything.
No, so far so good.
And so something we discussed was obviously CPA funding, which I think is a great resource, and I don't think this would be a very large ask either. Some of the other things that are mentioned here in the memo, which I guess we should probably, for the sake of this, should we just make that part, should we submit that with the minutes? Is there any issue?
I guess
I can at least
you
recap
could
that.
I think that would be
Yes.
the most appropriate thing to do, would be to do a recap.
So where we are right now too, just for anyone else watching or tuning in, I've started to reach out to, so in regards to your comment about the Gazette article, I mean, I'd rather, I mean, if they want to write an article now, that's great. I think there's not much to write about other than the fact that we're interested. I've reached out to a fair amount, I'd say, you know, somewhere between 10 and 20 kind of interested dog owners in the city who would be willing to come forward. I know Mr. Ramsey's here because he's been wanting the park for a while. And that is kind of, that group is kind of in holding for whenever we need to have more of a public presence to, you know, either for the purpose of CPA or to come forward before the council, whatever relevant groups there are. And I've done a little bit of research on the other cities, but I've kind of kept that, that's kind of been on the back burner right now. Just kind of in terms of where we are in the process, I wanted to kind of get through this step first. I have a colleague in Fitchburg who's a city councilor who ushered through their dog park, so I've kind of been in parallel conversations with her, and she'd be happy if her schedule allowed to come and speak to us more or help us participate in this process, and I think she'd be a really good contact for this. So that's where we are. And then, so again, Jeff and I had met, and the two kind of parallel, or things that kind of almost exist in parallel to each other, or one after the other, is being able to at least determine what properties we would like to zero in on, and then once we have an idea of a few properties, to move forward with a request for funding for preliminary design. So that's kind of where that brings us to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get into more about the discussion about the specific properties identified, but here's where we are now.
So can I just recap this to make sure I fully understand it, because there's a couple steps here.
Yeah.
All right. So right now, we're going to, in this meeting in the next hour, look at a list of properties that potentially could be dog parks that the city owns, and make a suggestion of 3 of them, if that's what I'm reading here, that look like we could like them. We don't need to decide on one, and then the CPA will get some money to actually draw up some plans on what those 3 could potentially look like, at which point we can have sort of there will be like an engaged public process about those options, and then at that point, that's sort of in the planning department's court, right?
Yes, so yeah, I think that's a good summary. I mean, I think the memo does say that we would try to get sketches of 3 of the 5. So there's some things that are certainly flexible, and then
Right.
this is the initial discussion to have that, so.
Right, so there are 4 that we needed to look at and maybe figure something out, but the
Right.
target is to try and get 3.
I think, yeah, and I think that's a little bit of the unknown is we should be in a 3 to 5 range.
Mhm.
So the idea of the property committee would be to take the first stab at identifying, like, say 5 that are possible considerations. So that we are clear, like your committee is clear that these 5 are reasonably suitable to explore.
Right.
So we're just establishing a list of 5. Then I talked to Councilor Zarek today that what I did proactively is asked to have a discussion item on the agenda for CPA for their meeting next week. So I don't think that so the timeline that's in the memo was written a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
We're already unable to meet this proposed sort of hypothetical deadline, which would have had a full application to CPA for the amount of funds we need. So we're not quite there yet, but we are able to get a discussion in front of CPA next Thursday, which is to make sure that CPA would be willing to fund a small project.
Mhm.
So it's really a courtesy asking them if they were
Right.
willing to consider funding something, which I think would position this group to then prepare an application and have it submitted for the February meeting of CPA.
Okay.
I will sort of explain that I did have a conversation with a consulting firm who has done some of the dog parks in the area,
Mhm.
and they are willing to provide us with a free estimate for how much they might charge. And so what I have outlined, I didn't do it until after this meeting, but what what the thought was to ask for the cost for a design consultant to assess 3 to 5 of our properties. So we would benefit, I think, from having a consultant look at the 5 and run preliminary cost estimates for all 5, so that we have an understanding of what might be involved with looking at 5. And then through that process, we would potentially have the consultant hold one public meeting for the community to look at those 5. And out of that, the goal would be to come out with one that you would potentially pursue for the Stanton grant.
And that choice of the one would be made by us, the planning board?
We
planning
should
department?
determine that. I didn't really determine that step, but if we could come out of a public meeting with one site that is preferred, so that's a requirement in the Stanton grant,
Mhm.
is that you have had a public meeting that identifies the site.
Mhm.
Then the final step would be the consultant would, if you go to page 5 of the memo, it's item number 2 that's listed. So the consultant would then draw a preliminary sketch, which would show the estimated size of the parcel, the proposed perimeter of the park, the layout of the park with perimeter fencing, and sufficient architectural detail to prove park feasibility and form the necessary construction draft budget. So there's actually a fair amount of legwork that the community has to do to be ready to make the application to the Stanton Foundation grant. So the estimate, and it's not based on anything in writing yet, but the estimate of the ask of CPA would be somewhere between $1,000 and $9,000. I mean, that's a big window, I don't know, so I expect to get a.
It'd be good to narrow that down.
Right, I expect to get a number from, so I am speaking with Berkshire Design Group, who has offered to show us a number for what they would charge to facilitate a review of 5, public meeting, and then a drawing of 1.
Just to throw it, I mean, I don't know if I can speak.
Happy to have you join in, it's a very
Okay.
informal process at this point.
The Agawam Park and Rec, he said that anything, you need to know anything about, he's been like the model people have gone to and said, how did you do this? And they've got the board up, I have pictures too. And
I have
you've seen-
pictures, I was there.
Yeah, where it has those smaller dog, bigger dog, and they have the track around each one, and it's a measured mile, or 3 laps around the thing equals 1 mile for people that walk, and
Sure.
That's great.
that's kind of a nice, you're not walking in muck, it's a paved walk area along the edge of the fence.
Cool.
They have what I would call it it's not an airlock, but you go into one gated section and you're in here.
Yep,
And
yeah.
then you can.
So
Right.
when you open the first gate, a dog can't.
Right.
Yeah.
And they have the less than 30-pound or 35-pound dogs on
Mhm.
this side, and then the bigger ones here. But if you want your little one to go over there because he's comfortable, fine, but you can't put the big in the little.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, and they have the little ramps and
Little kind of a play area, different ways that the dogs can
a
have fun
tire.
and exercise.
And these are all things to obviously get into as we get deeper
Yeah,
into the
there's
process.
a couple benches, a self-waterer where they.
Yeah.
The thing that's kind of interesting is if we're talking about a preliminary design, are those issues expected to be addressed in the budget of the preliminary design?
In the memo, there's a list of what needs to be included in the cost estimate. Is it in this one?
Because he was really willing to.
Yeah, it's on page,
Help out.
Oh, yeah,
it's on
that's
page
great.
5 of 5, I think, item 2, am I correct?
Yeah.
Who he had designed it, and yeah, it was.
So
It looks like
estimated
it's a
square
great
feet,
park.
proposed perimeter of the dog park, layout of the dog park with fencing and sufficient architectural detail to prove park feasibility and form necessary construction.
Now, were they looking for a budget at that point?
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's
So,
actually.
I mean, then you get into things like, do we want doggy grass? The new thing is dog grass, a big fad. I spoke with the Stanton Foundation this week,
What's
ask-
wrong with normal
and ask them
grass?
about that. Well, the problem is you have to mow it all the time.
Mhm. Right.
And you have to, or it dissipates. I'm not all that
Right,
familiar,
it
but
turns
it's one
into
of the
mud,
things,
yeah.
it's one of the things that Katie at the Stanton Foundation said. You know, that's the latest rage in dog parks. Some people love it and some people don't.
Is it like
So-
AstroTurf?
That's the sense that I have, is that it's like AstroTurf, and
Mhm.
it doesn't need a lot of maintenance. Now, whether there's an expense to that, so those are the kinds of things I imagine the consultant will help us with.
Yeah, 'cause
Mhm.
I will
Ag
add that-
one was.
They didn't have it, it was
sandy
pretty
and-
sandy, pretty you know, I don't mean to knock anything, but it
Yeah.
wasn't, it wasn't a nice, well, it's in winter time and by now you
Yeah.
have snow on the ground.
Yeah, you need a sustainable surface, and
Yeah.
again, these are things that you get into farther ahead, but yeah,
In
it's
the
things
design.
worth looking to, yeah.
It is, so there is a document, there's a link in the overview for Stanton Foundation, so it's captured here, but the link I didn't print. So they have a checklist for cost items to be considered in developing the draft construction budget, and there's a long list, so it goes through construction, mobilization and erosion control, site clearing costs, site stormwater drainage.
Stormwater drainage. yeah.
Cost of surfacing with preferred materials, stone, dust, rice, stone, grass, etc. Fencing, walkway surfacing, handicapped access, cost of water hose, bibs, fountains to dispense potable water for dogs, park surface irrigation. So they ask, so that's why in the initial first glance of, we can apply for the Stanton Foundation grant, it sounds like you're just gonna make the application, but it's actually it's not too overly burdensome, but it's a fairly in-depth process to get to the construction budget, which is what you need to make the application for the design.
Mhm.
So where the timeline in the memo is optimistic, so it's subject to change. I think it's subject to some continuous editing as we get into the first
Mhm.
several, like the first month or two of this. It'll take, so we gotta get to CPA in February to really then hone in on where we.
10%.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
And forgive me, because I should have told you this while we were having this conversation, I have the Fitchburg application,
Okay.
my colleague sent it to me.
Okay.
Oh,
So I could forward that to all
Yes,
you guys,
okay.
yeah, and that helps show how they broke it down to, I mean, just really generally, I'll just tell you, they talk about fencing, the underground water line, non-play equipment, play equipment, site work and landscaping, and it's broken down that way, and I can send that to you. And actually, I believe she's an engineer and did a lot of the engineering work. I could send this all to you guys.
Cool.
Yep.
And
thank you.
if things line up too, I'm happy to bring her back for a future meeting, so.
yeah.
So anyhow, so here we are.
I mean, one thing that I do wanna mention, so my hope is to get something from Berkshire Design. I don't think we'll have it for the CPA meeting next week,
When is their meeting?
Thursday. So the
Thursday.
purpose,
What time?
the thought process,
Six.
6 p.m.
was just to introduce it to them, so that they are aware that there would be a potential
Mhm.
application coming in February. For projects that are under $10,000 or less, the city can allocate funds and choose a
And choose
consultant.
a
Right.
consultant
So,
without going out to
so
bid, et cetera,
that would be
et cetera.
one potential question for your colleague in Fitchburg, is if they could recall the amount of money that they had to spend in consultant fees to prepare for the Stanton Foundation. But I'm expecting to get that number from Berkshire in the near future, but ideally it would be under that threshold. If it's over that threshold, then we would look at a different process, which would add some additional time.
That's for the pre-design, right?
Right, to get to the construction.
She might have done them herself in her role as an engineer to save money, so, but I could ask her to estimate how much she thinks it would have cost her as I mean.
Yep. So then looking at that, you know, it takes about 2 months from the application with CPA to getting the funds available for allocation. So the timeline gets elongated pretty quick. And then we would have the consultant who would do some basic evaluation of some sites. And then the community meeting, I think, is important. It's a requirement in the foundation
Yeah.
grant that you have clear, that you've had a public meeting and that there's an understanding that that property has consensus around it. It may not be unanimous, but that it's feasible. Then the construction estimate from there is probably not too much time, and then you would be preparing the sand grant application. So, it's certainly something great to pursue, and I think if we start based on the meeting tonight, introduction to CPA in January, and then a formal application in February, then the ball would be rolling pretty well.
Right. I guess the questions that come up in my mind are, in terms of who will maintain the park
Yes.
once we get the park in operation. But
It's a
first,
park
for
concern.
the public, we haven't discussed this yet, so I think it's important just to note for those who may watch. The design is an expense of the city through CPA, presumably, and that would be $1,000 to $10,000 to come up with the design. And then the funding for the rest of the design of the park, the initial application was up to $25,000, if I recall.
Correct.
And that is funded entirely by the grant, if the grant is accepted. Is that your understanding of this? And then the process would be, you go ahead and hire a contractor to build the park that you've designed. And that generally runs somewhere between between $225, $250 is the target for the overall expenditure of the hard construction, of which the city pays 10%, presumably from CPA funds, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
I believe that is verbatim correct?
okay?
Mr. Chairman.
If it is, then just wanted the public to know that we're not taking anything out of the city, very, very little out of the base city budget, and it looks like it could be somewhere up to $35,000 maybe total. And we get a grant somewhere around $225
It's a
or
lot of
so.
bang for your buck.
So it would be a good bang for the buck and something worthy to pursue for the purpose and economically for the city. Then we look at the operational maintenance costs, and that becomes something, another question. I had a short conversation with the mayor, and it sounded like she was under the impression this could take a long time, she told me. She said it took Agawam 12 years, that's what she said.
I mean,
I
Fitchburg
don't
did
know.
theirs really quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it all depends
I-
on.
But that was her impression, so I
Yeah.
didn't, I just wanted to be sure that we, in our approach, should we find a good location and decide to move forward with CPA, that we had some idea of how to be able to maintain the park, because those costs are not covered by the grant.
Of course.
Those would be something that would either become a municipal function or a function of a committee or
Friends of.
group, friends of the
Mhm.
park. And sometimes you can't always rely on that, and that's why I was hoping that this might have reached a level where we had friends of a park to bring this forward in a group committed, other than yourself,
No, I'm sure
to
if
the
round
work
up-
that it takes.
I have no doubt we could find
Yeah.
some
It's-
volunteers willing.
It's
Yeah.
a betterment of the community.
I think
Definitely.
there's a little bit of a chicken and egg question
Mhm.
there, which is so I think that there's relatively low risk in pursuing the design grant
Mhm.
fully. I think to submit the design grant, there is a commitment letter that the city will maintain the property if no other.
If no other
right.
organization
So,
will.
but up until that point, there's fairly minimal risk. It's after you are completed with the design and you pursue the construction grant that you would want to then have all the mechanisms in place to have the maintenance and responsibilities taken care of. So the only thing I guess I was suggesting is that if we don't pursue the design grant until we have a dog committee or a group formed, we may miss an opportunity. So
Yes.
there is some potential to move forward with the design, but begin, I guess, in parallel, the process of forming people who would be willing to and run a
Yeah.
separate process of beginning that process. You just wouldn't wanna wait necessarily to have that situated.
Yeah, and to support that, that was kind of the conclusion we came to with the informal kind of meeting we had, was that if we have a committee, if we have this committee now, it's hard to keep them together without, we need to have things moving in motion for this to happen. And like I indicated at the beginning though, there's people waiting in the wings. It's just a matter of when to kind of flip that switch, is to formalize that group.
Yeah.
And I think by getting these few steps done, that's when we can start getting people together.
While we're on the topic of missed opportunities, I just want to remind people that I need to leave at 6.
It's 6. I have been
So
keeping that in
if
my
we
mind.
want to,
I would move to move forward with trying to evaluate some of these.
And that's something that is the task that we have at hand, for sure. I just for one quick second, while we're on the line of funding, have you had any conversations with the mayor about the maintenance?
No,
Okay.
no, I mean, I think,
Because she would be the one who would
I had
approve that into the budget and
yeah, I had a conversation with the Parks Director, so John Mason, to paraphrase him, it was that there is no desire for the Parks Department to be responsible for this in the long term. I think Mr. Mason understood that there would be a letter that would accompany this, that if the Easthampton Friends of the Dog Park committee or group failed to fulfill its duties, the Parks Department would obtain the responsibilities. However, I think his approach was that this
His
is not
budget.
a budgeted item.
Yeah,
that's-
This is
that's-
gonna be
that's what-
another funding mechanism that has to be determined. Maybe not for the design portion, cause I think we could always pursue the design, and if we weren't ready to pursue construction, then fine, but we have the design
at this
part.
point, we'd have a
Right.
design, an initial
Right.
application design. is
But I
what
think
you're- what
the
you're
sense
talking
is
about.
that there was not a desire to incorporate it
Because of the
into-
money.
into the
Or like,
budget. We can follow up on
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Because I think in order to get CPA money, that's one of the questions, beyond the initial, actually, I think you're using the word design, there's the application design, and then there is the formal design grant
Well,
of 25,000.
So
right?
that's,
Yeah.
so if I understood it correctly, we do the preliminary
Work to make an application.
for the design. So the first application we're making is for up to 25,000 for the design.
That will then be done, or will reimburse us for what we've done?
So-
Yes, it's to be able to submit to the initial application to get the design.
To get the
grant.
25,000
Right,
correct,
grant,
yep.
or up to 25,000.
Right, and the up to $25,000 design
Got it.
grant results in construction-ready
Bids.
then
They're
you,
not
then you
bids,
could,
but
then you can pursue
plans that
the
you-
construction grant.
Right.
Right, okay.
Which all makes sense.
Right, okay.
I just want to be sure that, I mean, I would imagine the CPA would have questions about that and about who's going to handle it and what the committee,
Yeah,
what
and I
the
think that
commitments
that's
are.
one of the nice things of going to the committee next Thursday, is you can understand if they have questions,
Yeah.
they can be incorporated into the application.
And my understanding too of the way this works, and I think you're asking excellent questions, is that we have to continue to ask these questions, but we could do so kind of in parallel of applying for the pre-design and even the design, because you can get the design grant and have it designed and then kind of be in a holding pattern for saying, okay, we're ready for construction, we need to check A, B,
I
and C
think the
off.
city's, I would certainly, at this point, be in favor of going that far in the process. And I think that makes sense, I agree. You can always hold it, and if it's next year or the year after, the plan's been made, maybe for whatever reason, it isn't appropriate to submit. But, so, the task at hand becomes, if there aren't any other questions right now about process or the issues, just which sites I think a site visit would be appropriate by the committee, as a way to eyeball sites and have that, so I'm available as early as next week.
This time of year, I guess we'd have to do it on a weekend if we wanted to see it
During the
Yeah.
lights time, yeah.
I have no
Um,
problem.
And we need to post a meeting if we do.
Yeah, probably.
So we'd have to post, and Barbara has left for the day, right? Yes. And so posting
Thursday?
meetings can't happen this weekend.
So we could,
So
Jeff,
I-
is that your, you don't post me, you don't have the ability to post a meeting.
Correct.
Is Thursday at
Barbara
5
go through
o'clock
it.
night? I mean, what, for upstairs?
I think it is, yeah.
So am I,
If
so
you
you
wanna-
don't, so you don't
if you
wanna
wanna
discuss
check.
any of these prospective properties on the merits, on their own, on the merits that we could,
But we could discuss them all, we could, what I'm saying, we could discuss the properties, select 5.
Right.
And say, okay, why don't we schedule a meeting for, this, I'd go Saturday or Sunday if they were available and we could post it, but I'm not sure we can post it.
Oh, yeah.
Or we could do something next week, Jim, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great, I think that her time.
Well, you know,
I think some of these could be ruled out just based on not even visiting them, and I think Jeff can get into that more, but.
I think it's worth talking about them, but then maybe have
Yeah.
the goal, your site set on a site visit.
I mean,
Mhm.
if it doesn't take more than another 10 minutes to go to another property, or another 20 minutes,
Yeah.
we could do that, but if there's something that obviously doesn't work.
Yeah, the one that, there was some, the initial list was generated just through the first initial casual conversations and then that first meeting, and I think I had it dated as December 6th. So I think between those two conversations, there was an initial list generated to start the conversation. Town Farm, Counselor Kwasinski asked to have added. I did a preliminary look yesterday, and I believe that the property is under APR. So except for the lodging house, the remainder is agricultural protection restriction, and the dog park would not be a suitable use for that. So I will double check that.
How is it under APR?
The Town Farm lot is.
I'm sorry, it is APR, yeah, okay, got it.
And I think I vaguely remember reading that in terms of the trail network design.
Why would the city have something in APR?
The
Because
APR
the city being
has
the
always
owners.
been, the city has been partners on APR, especially a couple parcels on Oliver Street.
Mhm.
The Chickaway Farm in
Yeah.
particular was one of the first APRs in the state.
Yeah, out near
Right.
Park Hill Orchard, there's some
Right,
acre land,
right.
yeah.
So I think,
Right.
I will double check it, but
Yeah.
per the
So that
assessor's
if it is
record,
APR, that would
it
preclude.
would preclude it.
So
Um,
I would, so just to clarify too, so there was kind of a preliminary discussion about the merits of some of these sites, and Jeff could probably summarize as well for you too.
Sure. So, the other one I think that is on the list, the last one is Nonotuck Park. So I'll do my best to recap the initial discussion there, which is, when this got first presented to me, I recall it being at the Civics Academy. We were at the Civics Academy and Chief Alberti was like, I got this grant. And I personally, as a resident and the city planner, immediately thought of Nonotuck Park. The initial response of the Parks Director was that it was something that the Parks Commission would need to hear and evaluate. And my understanding is that the concept was brought to the Parks Commission, and the Parks Commission voted unanimously to not pursue that use in Nonotuck. So I don't know if Jim can elaborate on that particular discussion.
Yes, because access to the park, the gates shut down, the roads aren't plowed in the winter. So if you wanna use that, you're shut down, you're not getting, I guess there was talk about putting it down by the pavilion, and then it's clearing trees, and there's not enough parking for the picnic. As it is now, it's access.
Mhm.
It's access, and it's just, yeah,
I can understand that it might be problematic in many ways to do. I visited the park this weekend, looking at it and saying, this looks like a really cool place, and I was there for only about 30 minutes, and in the first 20 minutes, 15 dogs on leash were there with their owners,
Mhm.
walking in
Yeah.
to the area, and there was a lovely site on the left, just before the children's playground, and a lovely site on the right, just before the pavilion. Now, that would require some additional trees to be taken down, or selectively down, both on the left and on the right as you go up the hill.
The biggest
Yeah,
issue
it's the
really in the
parking
discuss,
and
yeah, the biggest issue is access, certainly in the
The
winter.
roads are plowed
No.
daily, not for public use, but they are plowed.
Mm,
There is municipal equipment in the back, in the far back.
I mean, I
Has
think
to be-
for the
that
wa-
has
to
to
the
be
water.
accessed. You have to get to the pumping stations.
So- yeah, I mean-
At the well.
so the short end-
So
yeah,
That's
go
done. The sidewalks aren't plowed, so that's an additional expense.
And in
And
the
it's
park.
not,
the
it's
whole-
not open for public use.
Right.
Right, that's the
It's not
I mean,
issue.
open
and perhaps
at this
more
point.
importantly, the park
It's a
commission
liability
voted
issue.
it down.
Right.
So,
And so that,
we can
that
agree
really
or
not
disagree
sorry.
with that decision.
I agreed with you initially too, and they have to lengthy discussions, it was kind of explained to me that it was
We
not
can
gonna
move
happen.
on to the next one. If there's agreement that that may not be a place to visit.
I think
at this
that
point,
ideally that would have
initially.
been great, because it's such a community space and you have people there for everything, and it just wasn't gonna work.
It's access. I think, I know that's,
Jeff, there were other sites and other possibilities? you
Right,
said?
so those seemed like the two that, for the reasons we just discussed, get excluded.
All right.
Then these are the remaining are the four that seemed to have some level of viability. And so the memo, I tried to make clear that aside from what we're doing right now, we really have not, no one's really done a detailed pro or con of these four sites. They just happen to be city-owned and potentially of a size that might be suitable. So we haven't done any evaluation. So the first one is the rear lot at Parson Street School. The second is the Oliver Street landfill area. So it's and I have a map of that actually. It's a larger. there's-
Actually, that's what I think of as where the solar
Correct.
panels are.
Yep,
Mhm.
yep.
As opposed to its old use.
Right. Then there is what's just dubbed right now as the Treehouse property, but there is a,
It's not Treehouse property, it's
No.
city-owned property just south of the
area,
Treehouse.
treehouse property area, maybe?
yeah.
Is
Yes.
that?
It's
that's
really
accurate?
city-owned.
That's 226 Park Street.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
that's
that's
a
another
home
way of
run.
The
describing.
treehouse
it.
annex.
A neighbor.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
that's
and-
where the sludge went from the pond.
Correct.
They
Mhm.
dumped it in that field.
Yep. And then the last one is the Boy Scouts camp, which is at the very end of Highland Ave.
Mhm.
So I think a site visit is a good idea. I personally don't know if I can make it, but I would encourage this group to do it anyway. But the Highland Ave one, if I could offer my anecdotal observations, I did drive down to the end of Highland Ave. It appears at a glance that it would be, there would be a lot of access considerations. There's no road in that would be suitable. So if we do think about this, we have to think about a road or access that's suitable for two-way traffic
Mhm.
and a parking area. And so Highland Ave just appears on the surface to present some immediate access issues. I didn't go interior of the property, so I don't know if it's wooded or hilly or not, but that's something to consider.
And if I recall correctly, that neighborhood is already very protective about excess traffic in that area.
Right. But I think the question is more, do we keep it on a list? And could a consultant do a little bit more in-depth analysis on behalf of the city to?
I think it would be worth our
provide.
time to go out there as the property
Yeah.
committee.
Mhm.
if you-
Absolutely.
If you haven't seen it, to eyeball it, whether it be for this use or for some other use that may come up in the future.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
a
yes,
site
agreed.
visit is good. I wouldn't take it off the list for a site
Right.
visit.
Mhm.
Yep,
We may say this doesn't make sense for a designer to look at,
yep.
or to put out as the public, because we've eliminated it for one reason or another.
Yep, and the Treehouse property is easily accessible to park and then traverse by foot. The Oliver Street landfill area, it was certainly put on the list. It's unclear where this would occur. So there's some questions there. but you could certainly eyeball it's easy to get to, but there hasn't really been any thought as to where this would go. The major cleared part of that site is consumed by solar, so the remainder is wooded. So just being like the baseline obvious there.
Ideally, I think we'd wanna have a park that would be somewhere between 1.5 and 2 acres.
I think we talked about, I don't disagree with that goal, but
Including the parking.
weren't we talking
Including
about
some
like
parking.
50,000 square feet is like the average size of these parks?
That
I
may be
guess-
the actual enclosed area.
Yes, I
Okay,
think.
but I think you wanna have some sort
sort
of
of
buffer
mhm.
around the park itself, other areas to kind of separate you from
Which-
whatever other uses, residential uses particularly.
And I
There you go
do
with buffers
This
again,
does
Jim.
Yeah,
have
I know,
buffer.
listen, they're.
I agree with you.
They're important.
Well, because
Yeah,
if we could secure a good property, it could be a community space that's not just for dogs.
Not just
Yeah,
for dogs. And I,
I agree.
in Agawam, it just happened to be a big field.
Agawam, they have their baseball field and their
it's
skateboard
incorporated,
park.
Yeah, skateboard park there, so, anyway,
I mean,
Mhm.
my only, I've got a larger dog. Well, she's not actually big. She's just really energetic. She's pit bull, so she's. So you know, I when we lived in Virginia, there were some of those little compact dog parks, and
Yes.
it was useless for her. She would tear from one end of that to the other in
Mhm.
30 seconds, and like.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why, I mean, if I throw my 2 cents in on Parson Street, I mean, I just hate to see when we do but I'm saying projects like
This is a city,
Easthampton.
this is a city
Okay,
operation.
Like Easthampton, when we're gonna do the new school, and then they vote, and then they cut it down, and then
Mhm.
we do the public safety building, and then they cut it down, and the police have to go do their target practice in Holyoke, because they didn't put it in the basement. I mean, don't, do it right. I mean,
So
that's
I
my-
agree with you.
So I think
Yeah.
an acre and a half to 2 is good, 50,000 just puts you over, a little over an acre, and I think that's the enclosed area for that. So that's why I'm adding a little bit
Yeah.
for some sort of space around.
Trail network,
I'll use the word
dirt
buffer,
track.
buffer again.
I like it, I like it.
I mean, yeah.
agree with you on these buffers.
But that would be my thing on the. I mean, Parson Street. What's attractive about it is it's in an area where there's a lot of people who could walk their dogs directly to
Yeah.
that space. But I look at that and I'm like, my dog could get from one end of that to the other in about
Mhm.
20 seconds.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but maybe that's not a huge
Is it
deal.
worth going out there? I mean,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you guys wanted to, I'm happy to do it.
I do, because I think
I have
we-
real reservations for that reason.
But also for the purposes you stated, I think it's great that we go out there, because I think at some point we're gonna have to have a discussion in this committee
But
about.
what
you
might
know,
make sense there as time goes on.
Look, I have no
Right.
problem visiting 4 places.
Sure.
I can make that space in my weekend. Should I, I've never done a site visit on the council before.
Yeah.
I know that we tend to like to tape our meetings. Should I hit up Easthampton Media about following us out there?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
How do we, because we're gonna have to.
Typically, no, our rules don't require us to tape site visits.
be pretty cool.
Sure, but what are we doing?
For the sake of
right.
transparency, though, I mean.
I mean,
it's
I
not
don't
gonna
know.
be
You're
kinda
right.
cool.
I just am wondering what the best way, like, in terms of,
I kinda like that
like,
idea.
I
but-
guess if we're agreeing not to actually
Get one of the,
vote on anything, that doesn't
Chief to
really
come down with his body cam.
I mean, I think the minimum requirement is to take notes.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, you're not holding a public hearing, so
Mhm.
it's different. You can do a site visit as a notice of a public meeting. You would want to have a couple notes to recap what you observed, basically.
Right.
If the idea is to help members of the public understand what the properties look like,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would recommend maybe getting a little further into the process, and then bringing Easthampton Media down and showcase. So I think at a certain point that would be very useful, but I think we don't know enough yet. So
I think that makes sense.
Maybe take some photos though, and things like that.
a
for the
couple
purpose of-
representative photos would be great,
That is
because
good.
that can be
Yeah.
put into a package that starts to help show the progress of this committee, kind of.
I wonder
Provide
if,
insights.
so we have to figure out when we're gonna do this, and someone who might be interesting to pull into this for the purpose of site visits,
Mhm.
and what we just talked about. Maybe not this specific time, although it could help, is Pat Bruff in terms of his drone. But just something
I
to
bet
think
he'd
about.
be psyched to do that, actually.
And I don't know if that has to happen exactly with these visits, but that might be.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
At some point.
As you said, I think that may be.
Maybe that's jumping ahead.
Premature.
Yeah.
Right, at this point to be.
They're good ideas, I think it would be the evolution of the
Yeah.
discussion, I think it's, without knowing, even if you would, after the site visits, if you would even consider it worthy of pursuing any
Yeah, we might
further
just
than.
look at it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So do we want to try to figure out a date we could do this?
I have a date to propose.
Oh,
We probably can't do this weekend just because it's not enough time to
Mhm.
put it on the agenda. Next weekend, I'm gonna be at the Mass Municipal Association Conference, Friday and Saturday, but Sunday the 20th, I'm free.
I'm free too. Or JP.
And that's the day before,
Oh, Martin Luther King Day, so I could do that too.
I can't do MLK Day.
Alright.
Sunday.
Does that work for you,
Let me check.
Mr. Chairman?
Pull it up here.
Have you been to any of the sites now?
We're talking about the 20th.
Correct.
Pulled up and looked at them, I've never walked.
I mean,
I
I
can do early afternoon generally.
Sure.
What time early afternoon?
1 o'clock.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I have a appointment at 2, but I could probably move that. That's not it's not.
You want
How long-
to try 12? I
I
just don't
could-
want to start early in the morning because
To hit
it's
'em
cold
all.
out there.
Yeah. How long do you think it will take?
I
probably.
think we should plan on a half an hour at least for each site.
Okay.
And then we'll
Travel
have to-
time, whatever.
Yeah. All right. So.
Walking around a bit. So you should, it could be anywhere from 2 to 3 hours.
Okay. So we'll say. You want to say high noon?
You want to say 11:30?
I'm good with that. Yeah. And I
Just to
could.
give you, you have something at 2.
I could reschedule that too. I mean, just I'll. It's not like.
Tom?
I can do 11:30.
11:30? All right, so 11:30 on Sunday the 20th.
And where do you want to meet? Where do you want to start, or do you want to just send an email and we can figure it out? Jeff, are you
Yeah, we
available?
can figure that out.
I'm not gonna be available, but I would encourage the committee to do this, I think it makes
Yeah.
sense.
The other possibility,
Sorry.
I didn't mention it to you when we had a short meeting, just a short chat. And that was an idea where people could have, would there be any interest in a long trail? Where you walk free with your dog over a long, short route? I don't think there's enough, like 10 feet over a mile or 2.
Well, the nice thing about the Treehouse property,
Would that be
Is-
anything that,
You could.
there's trails back there already.
Right.
there's trails there,
This whole,
Which is- which is outside of, I'm talking about enclosed trail, enclosed dog park trail, or is that just?
that's what
kinda
they
not-
usually, that's, the dog park is usually, if you do.
But
a big
enclosed
one.
in a circle, or enclosed in a rectangle, or some octagonal shape?
Yeah,
I'm
agron
talking
is-
about linear path with fencing around it for a couple of miles.
I think it's certainly something to talk about as we get more
It'd
into.
probably be very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the linear length of fence, I think. It's just,
Dogs
Yeah.
on a run.
I don't know about the
Yeah.
creative level of design, so I don't really
Yeah, I'm
have
just
any
throwing that
place
out
to
because I will
reference.
remind everyone, we do have access rights to the farm on Oliver, on the, not Oliver, at the intersection of Oliver, where the park is, right near
But there might be
the apple orchards.
there might be issues
Park
there
Hill.
too.
Park Hill.
Yeah. So I will say that.
I don't think that's an ideal, but I just wanted
you
to
can.
So there-
toss that out. I haven't seen it, I don't know if any parks are designed that way.
Well,
but-
so there were.
So essentially what I'm describing is an area where Dolots used to be, it is, nobody knows but you and I.
What,
The only issue is that
Just near, at the intersection of West and Northampton Street.
right.
Essentially all the way
it comes out
up
of
to
left
the
field.
orchard.
So there was
All
a-
the way, all the way to the orchard.
So there was a trail study done by, which I could pull up, that
Conway School.
the Conway School did, and I think, but I'm not sure, that the issue was that it falls into some sort of surface protected category.
Yeah, yep, same
I
thing.
think, I'm almost positive, so I love the idea.
Although we have the rights to the path, we don't have the right to build anything on it.
It's more what that we can't, we can build whatever we want, but it's what we actually do on the actual surface that we would be
That's something,
restricted from.
and I'm not sure it's the
pointing out,
ideal
we've got
dog.
5
Yeah.
months.
We have about 2 minutes and then you have to.
Can I just introduce something for
Sure,
the benefit of
absolutely.
before the time? So I have three resources that I didn't have time before this meeting. I will figure out how to get these to this group electronically.
Mhm.
It may be a photograph that can then be scaled to be a PDF, but so, we do have this parcel survey for Parson Street. So parcel A is the school, parcel B is the secondary site owned by the city. So this will be useful, I think if you're out doing a site visit, you could at least, so this site's pretty straightforward, it's surrounded by residential properties. This is the permitting set for when the dredge spoils were moved to the property south of Treehouse. The relevant, I think, page that I would provide to you guys is sort of the overview plan. We come in Button Road and then turn right into River Valley Way. This is the area where you could currently park and short walk onto the property. So you're looking at sort of, this property is, if you look at the GIS image that I enclosed, this property is 226 Park Street. It's very long. It goes all the way to Park Street, but what we're looking at is kind of this portion. So there was erosion control hay bales along the perimeter, but when you're out there, you would be able to see this relatively flat area that then dips down where the dredge spoils are, kind of tapering away towards this area. So you'll be able to walk this and you kind of will be able to get a sense of where you are at.
Yep.
So I mean, this is just like a little profile.
Also the ones, the maps were a reduced size paper version. I know sometimes when you're out in the field, it helps to have a paper version.
I mean, I think I could get it so it's 11 by 17.
That's great.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so then one more
All right,
is the landfill property.
all right.
So I just want to show, because there's the extent, you know, this
It's upstairs.
Oliver Street, this parcel here is what we call the brush dump.
Yep.
That's where Northampton is right here.
Right.
Mhm.
So the thing about this property is it's just not clear to me where it would go.
Right.
But just for clarity, the solar array is in this portion, and then there's a portion of the land that comes down here.
And it goes on to the other map, perhaps?
Yeah, because you sent two, Oliver Street.
One was Town Farm. which
Oh,
gets
that was
excluded, I
Town
guess,
Farm,
from-
gotcha.
so
Okay.
that's
where they are.
I see, I'm
So-
sorry, okay.
Behind, what we were thinking was behind the town farm building where the kennels were.
So this one just might be,
Which would-
this might just be
ironically
challenging
get
for a
us
site
there.
visit, I don't know
Yeah.
where you'll find, but that's
Right.
the purpose usually of site visits for.
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
Cool.
so I can make 11 by 17 versions of this.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
I we hope that you could join us to have you, if you're available. If you're not, I understand that.
The days that were discussed, I don't think I can. That weekend, I think we're planning to be away, so I would.
We won't count on you, that's fine.
Yeah.
I will, you're certainly free to go. We can continue
Yeah.
if you'd like, or we can, I don't know when you have to.
I don't have anywhere to be, but we could,
If you guys wanna
I think we're-
keep
I think
talking.
we're pretty
But
much
we
out.
can keep talking,
We
we can
certainly
leave before we
can. That's
adjourn,
fine.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have minutes.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you.
see you, man, have fun.
Oh, always.
And the fenced-in walk is what I mean, right now, I'll do that on the rail trail.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll
yeah,
walk.
Walk with you.
You can walk the Northampton line or to the Southampton line, but.
And like
it's- it's that free-spirited run.
You may not be able to walk off leash here if it's a. if
Oh,
it's
you
a
can't.
dog- if
You
it's a-
can't on the rail
On the rail, but
Right.
in a fenced-in area.
You can.
Let them go.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
and
the thing, and
That's
then-
the expectation.
and then they come
with
home
the-
tired.
But on a path, as opposed to,
Like a
That would
completely
be
boxed in path.
interesting.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to just
yeah.
like imagine this in my head. I like what you're saying, 'cause it's like, but it's all something to think about.
yeah,
Yeah.
just wanted to toss it out there.
Jeff, do these, or actually, I should ask you, JP, or I should ask both of you. So Jeff, for the preliminary discussion with CPA next week, do we need any formal list, or is it really an informal kind of discussion, like, what do we have to do? Type of thing. I guess from their perspective, it's not as important what we come forward with. It's when we actually ask for the money that we probably have to have some idea, right?
I guess,
But we can give them these properties next Thursday as places we're looking at.
These are possibilities that we're looking at, no
I think
site
it's-
visit has been accomplished.
Right.
The
I think
idea would be that we will come to you with,
yeah. I think going in with the list of the 4 is good. I think that you never know who could come up with some other idea
absolutely.
that hasn't been identified yet, so I think it's good to be clear and open. The idea is to introduce it, with the ability for them to identify questions or other information that we would potentially add into the application. So I'm certainly willing to work on the application, for CPA, and I would keep this group informed of any progress I can make with getting a preliminary estimate
Mhm.
for that, prelim work.
I'll work on some, I'll try to find
Okay.
out how
Yep,
much it costs.
that'd be
I can
helpful.
ask Agwam for you if you want.
Sure, I think having more information is gonna be helpful.
I'm reaching out to Greenfield,
Okay.
contact there, and it's the rec department in Greenfield that runs the park in Greenfield.
All the rec ones are
Yeah.
initiated, I
Yeah.
know that, it's just putting that, that so many hours a week to have somebody go there, adding that to.
Well, look, I would go to bat, I mean, this is kind of a total aside, but I would go to bat for, to find out how much it would cost and make a request to the mayor to consider that for a budget if this is something that's gonna happen. I mean, that's just, whether it be full-time or part-time in cooperation with the Friends of type of organization. So, just to put that out there. Right? I think that's part of the advocacy for this, is also making sure that the city's able to maintain it.
Yes, I think maintenance is gonna be an issue that has to be.
It's like chain link fences,
continuously, yeah.
that's the highest, non-maintenance type of offense, the chain link.
Mm-hmm.
No painting, no staining.
I don't know that there's an answer to this at this point, but there's a question I wanted to ask, which is, the relationship between the planning department and the property subcommittee, seems clear for this initial sort of phase to approach CPA for the funds. There's the formal process to get the funds appropriated by the full city council.
After it is approved by the CPA, right?
Correct, yep, and then, my question is about working with a consultant and holding a public meeting and making a final decision to move forward with a property. Whether you're envisioning that, I'm envisioning that being either the property subcommittee or the full city council. I don't think that, so like, somebody will need to hold a public meeting.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Facilitated with the help of a consultant, we'll all be there, but I think it would make sense for the property subcommittee to potentially hold that public meeting.
I think that's the
Okay.
appropriate location, the appropriate body to do that.
And then as a result of that meeting, ideally that one meeting would be enough to have the property subcommittee make a motion to, move forward with property X.
Right, to approve of it.
For the consultant to draw the preliminary construction estimate based on that, so.
Mhm.
The closing the loop is, does the full city council do anything else? So again, I don't know that there's an answer to this question at the moment, but it's
Full
something to
city
think about.
Council would approve the CPA funds for the design.
Right,
Right.
but the question is whether they go and have any other decision-making
Well,
part
so,
of this
Or
process.
finance.
so we're gonna vote on a series, we're gonna vote eventually on a series of properties, right? So we're gonna come out of committee with something we voted on, do they have
It's not a
to,
plan, right,
Right.
we come out with a plan,
do they have to vote on that and accept it?
no.
Okay,
The process would be that we would go to the CPA, and the CPA would make a request for the use regarding a particular property.
mm-hmm,
And that's where I thought the Friends group would be pretty important, or the commitment from the
But with the-
executive branch to be able to.
Well, so I just wanna make sure that I'm understanding it, is that with the consultant having, with the subcommittee, we'll have chosen a site. The consultant will do the construction estimate for that site, which would prepare the city to be ready to apply.
For the
plan-
design
For the
grant.
planning grant.
Right.
Like the design grant, yes, the
Yeah.
For
design
the design
grant.
grant,
So,
by CPA request to the city council for the funds.
No, that's.
The funds would-
no.
the
No,
fund-
the funds for the application would be submitted, yes.
right, the funds
Yeah.
are only for the pre-design work.
Right.
Then you would have the package ready for the application to stand grant, and I don't see any other.
Right.
So it would be, the planning board would assist with finalizing the application to stand grant for the design,
Do we have to have the final site selected when we,
yes.
Yeah.
so the public hearing comes before that?
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
and that would make sense that the property subcommittee would hold that public meeting, deduce the number of sites to one, and approve one to be the one that moves forward
Mhm.
for the design grant.
So,
Okay. We can chart
my
that
thought
out.
more about the maintenance and such and having the friends of, like, at the full ready is more between the Stanton design and the Stanton and the build. I mean, that, because ultimately we can have it designed and ready to go and then line everything else up. I mean, the big money ask is from the CPA, right, initially for the pre-design,
10%, oh,
No, the
yeah.
big money ask is for the,
or the final build.
for the build.
Yeah, right, and again, we're not, I don't know how I'd have to ask Stanton, but I mean, once you're accepted, right? We can, there's probably, I'm sure it expires at some point, but for instance, they could design it, and we don't have to build it immediately.
Correct. As far as I know.
Your thoughts, I mean, what are your
And then-
thoughts about
Yeah,
that?
and certainly something yeah, I think they take a separate application process for the build funds. So obviously, if you don't build it right away, then their grant goes away. They stop doing this in Massachusetts, okay, they've stopped. If they're there and available, the design is available.
Mm-hmm,
Now, would it be like, you'd have this, say, okay, what would it cost to put this design in there? The same design in each park?
It depends,
then-
you know, it really depends on the designer and somebody
What's
who's
it gonna
designed
take
parks
to-
before. Sometimes I think you incorporate more kind of an open space and say some trails and forests and you know, some people have talked about pond areas or a little stream running through, so there's various possibilities.
Yeah, there's
where
splash.
parks have been known to do this within
Mhm.
incorporating not just a physical.
And there is a list of every
Few
park
s- yeah.
that the Stanton went for.
I mean, I think the idea of having the pre-design consultant would allow them to do a pencil sketch for each one, including access and parking. And I think you would want them to also come up with a very rough cost estimate for construction. So, because if you get to an elaborate site that's hilly, traversing, and it could be beautiful that you have all these different features, but you would look at the proposed construction
If
budget.
it
you're
costs
at,
a lot
you know,
more for
right,
one reason or
so,
another,
but
sure,
that means, that
that's a
should be a
fact.
factor along with all the other considerations that you would come across in that process, so.
I mean, I think our goal should be to get to, you know, to get the design, to get preliminary designs done, so we can narrow it down via public hearing to one, to apply for the grant. And, cause we can have a design sitting around that doesn't, you know, cost us anything in terms of worrying about, not that we shouldn't worry about the cleanup and all that stuff and the maintenance, but I think that we don't have to, we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're gonna be like, oh my goodness, like, when are we gonna do? We can get the grant to get the design done without having without really at that point.
Yeah, the design
You know,
is an important element,
yeah.
because if you want it to look, so we also have to be realistic that it's not clear, and maybe this is an additional research item, is the actual costs incurred by the communities who have built them. So 225,000, you know, may not cover the full construction cost, so you will still have a gap to fill. But having the designs ready is always useful, because if another funding source becomes available, you have your design, you can seek other funding, or you could combine funding sources, Stanton construction with something else to come up with the full cost. So the design is really instrumental to be poised and ready
Mhm.
to act on, you know, a couple different options of funding. We've seen that, happen and being ready with design is great, because you're not scrapping to pull that together too quick, you have it in place.
Yep.
Probably would be good to, I'll invite the mayor to come with us, if that's something that you think might be appropriate.
Yeah,
I'd
why
like
not?
To try to create some, either there's buy-in to the plan, or there isn't.
Right, and I would just, I guess, if that were to not work out, for example, on the day that you chose, as the subcommittee you'd be doing due diligence, there may be 3 trips that you take for various reasons out to there in
That's true.
so you're doing the initial scoping, if she was available, I think that would be great, but if it's, to do the walk around, and then have more information at your disposal, and then you could bring in other people in advance of certain other, sort of benchmarks.
Sure.
Right,
That makes sense.
because it could be a foot of snow by that.
And that
time.
becomes
Who
what I
knows?
was hoping that we could avoid. It's unfortunate to have to do on a Sunday. Were there alternative dates that you might have next week if we don't have snow on the ground?
We're talking about the light too, I
In the
know
light,
that
I
that's.
know, yeah.
Not this close, so we're talking
You gotta
about,
get away-
what's next week? That's the week of the 14th?
Yeah.
12, 13.
And we could always ask Tom if he was available, and if he wasn't, then.
It would be tough in regards to work. That'd be really.
The Sunday with the Monday off, actually,
But that's the same weekend, right, that we're talking about.
I believe that
Oh,
you guys
that's
picked the
right.
Sunday, yeah.
Oh, for
Yeah,
you,
the same-
yeah.
But that's the same
No,
weekend.
don't worry,
That's the 21st, isn't it?
I mean, you
Yeah.
could
Yeah,
also,
so we're gonna
you
do the
probably have
20th.
some, do you have, well, I don't wanna volunteer your time, do you have time to kind of independently look at some of these sites
Yeah,
yourself?
yeah, I would like.
And I think
my-
you said you had some of them.
I'm concerned about things like wetland, plants, materials, things that might pop up to our minds that would be visible without the snow in consideration of the sites. Whereas if
Yeah.
there's wetlands vegetation,
I mean,
that's
just.
dead, but you can tell,
Yeah.
this really doesn't look like appropriate upland, that might be useful information to have. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
if there's
I mean,
a
it's-
stream, you'll see the stream.
Yeah.
Parsons is not gonna be an issue.
And I've been here.
That's not gonna
I've
be an
been to
issue.
everyone,
Yeah,
actually.
that one's not gonna be,
Right,
so
that's-
parts,
yeah.
the Treehouse
The
is not
solar
gonna be-
field.
Solar
area
field,
is-
to
I'm
my
not
knowledge-
Yeah,
aware.
Parson, I mean, Treehouse will not be an issue, yeah, I
Right.
can tell you that, it's
I
high
use it
ground.
already.
Yeah, right.
That's
Highland Ave is gonna be the one that would have
That might have
potential
some issues.
constraints, yeah.
There's a lot of issues with that. I mean, I'd love to see that
That's
as a
really
trail network
wooded.
at some point, but the
That's-
biggest, you'd burn up your whole, just clearing it, your whole,
There's a lot of old, big trees in there.
But I think basing that, like a conclusion like that on a sidewalk is gonna be valuable for you, no matter what, no matter who's there,
Mhm.
just assessing the walking condition of that property. I've never seen the camp area, so.
I
when
haven't
you get-
either.
When you get to the
Except
end
for-
of Highland,
Except for
it's.
the end of Highland, and I
It's
looked
probably
at it.
been 40 years since I walked back there.
are you available that day, by the way?
Yeah, Sunday.
I mean,
Yeah.
the public's, well, you're welcome, you don't feel.
Yeah, so let,
Great to have.
I've been to every one already. I mean, I know all these places, but I'll still walk them.
no, JP, so this is a public meeting, are we allowed, just for sake of process, could we, if it's a meeting, are we allowed to then have visited those sites and take a vote? That,
I would be reluctant to take a vote.
I'm just, yeah, I'm.
I would tend to think this is data collection. I've checked with Barb about the interaction function. I certainly think if there were wetlands and we wanted to point that out to one another, if there were certain features of the land that were positive or negative, I think we'd be allowed to discuss that, but certainly not to take, I don't feel comfortable taking a vote
Okay,
at this in-site visits.
then we'd have to, but we
Schedule, and we could post another
have
meeting.
to schedule a meeting because we need this final list before the February CPA, right? That's at least
Yeah.
our goal.
Yeah.
I mean,
Let me,
my
I
other
guess I would
argument.
wanna
that
think about that. I don't think that for the CPA, the request is for a consultant to help
Do it
the
design.
property subcommittee evaluate a series of sites. I don't
Okay.
think it has to be tied to a list. But it may help the consultant know whether we're at 4.
Mhm.
You know, there could be other sites, so, 4 or 5. 5 I think would be the maximum
Mhm.
within a small kind of confined project scope.
I mean, ideally, in my mind, if we could even, the Stanton doesn't require the number of sites, they just want us to select one. So I mean, if we happen to say, geez, there are 2 that make sense, the consultant could look at 2 and not have to evaluate a third.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem, I mean, if it's only a few $100 to say, let's eyeball a third site, that's
Yeah.
good. It makes sense
It just is the
politically to
type.
look at 3 sites.
Right,
Mhm, I agree.
right. Well, I think
Yes.
it's the public,
Like the
public
3 bids.
engagement process, just to. Yeah, I think all of this could be, I think, when would this group normally meet again, or
We
is
do
there?
meet at this point ad hoc, so we could meet, I would say, the following day or the 2 days.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
day-
say.
day
Would you
after.
wanna try to, should we circle back?
That's
with-
Martin Luther King Day, so I wouldn't want to meet on that day.
Right, but we could theoretically meet the
We
22nd,
meet on the
right?
22nd, yeah, but that's
We can
fine.
just double check with Tom.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
I would just request that if it is on the
Oh,
22nd,
it's-
that it be, the planning board meets on the 22nd at
Oh,
6,
yes,
so.
we do.
No.
and I-
Is Thursday
I'm tied up
good?
that day.
Is Thursday good?
Thursdays are-
Thursdays are typically good for me.
Because
Yeah,
I have
Thursday.
Wednesday meetings with the other groups.
Yeah,
I'm
Thursdays are pretty good.
So the 24th, I already moved a meeting because of this upcoming CPA meeting, so, and then Wednesday,
And
we
it's
went.
not-
Well, I was gonna say, Wednesday,
we
we don't have a council meeting that day, on the 23rd.
Oh, because it's a 5-month Wednesday. meeting.
5 Wednesday month, yeah.
I don't know how that works for you guys.
I have, I'm okay that one.
Yeah.
I
If you
have a
kept, like, the
meeting, I have a
5
meeting that evening at 6, so I could do something at
5.
5.
Yeah.
I mean, I could,
On the 23rd, if that makes sense.
that would work for me.
Yep.
Yep, let's put that down.
Yeah, well,
Just
so
Tom?
we can circle back with Tom, yeah. Because at that point, we've gone to the site visits and the purpose is just to kind of vote on these final,
That's right.
for consideration. So, and then a lot of the due diligence too, with the wetlands and stuff, that doesn't even really come into play until we really start to get into the public hearing about this.
Except if we can avoid it.
I'm not just,
If we can
yeah.
avoid it at all costs, in my mind, I hate to see money go to waste.
No, I
If
agree,
something
and I'm not
obvious-
trying to cut corners either,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, in terms
Yeah,
of, like, some of the leeway that we have.
definitively, we may not be able to make a determination.
Right,
But if that's really the question, then maybe we shouldn't be looking at the site if it's questionable.
Well, I know
Because
this
it will
one
take
is where
money
they
to
put-
flag it.
They've already been trucks in and out of
Mhm.
there, so it's,
Yeah.
you can't disturb. I know that one, and Parson Street's paved, basically.
well, conservation, what do you think I mean, we know Parson Street, right, but it's really
It
just.
just doesn't
yeah.
seem like,
We'll do the site visit, we'll set that meeting, and then kind of,
So property meeting on the 23rd at 5 o'clock.
mm-hmm. Blah, 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 where was I? Oh,
23rd, 5 o'clock.
perfect.
I'll take care of posting these with Barb.
Okay, we're meeting on the 20th at 11:30, we'll determine where you wanna meet first.
Yes.
12 o'clock, 1:30, so 12:30, 1, yeah, I'll push that 2 o'clock meeting up, I think would be smart, just to be safe.
you could knock off Boy Scouts and Oliver in the same quadrant,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and then over to Parson.
So,
I don't know, just-
I'm thinking Treehouse, Highland, Oliver, and Parsons. Does that
I'm
make
sorry,
sense?
say it again, I'm sorry, I was,
Treehouse, Highland, Oliver, and Parsons as a proposed route.
Mm-hmm.
We could either meet at Treehouse or here.
Well, it's just probably, we can probably just meet.
Why don't we plan on the meeting? at
So parking is the
Treehouse?
last,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Just like scheduling a real estate tour. That's easy, okay. We can do that.
Treehouse, then you'd meet at that one, go there first, is that what
And
you're
we're
saying?
thinking, we
Is that
would
what
meet
you're
at the end,
thinking?
was there a particular intersection I'm thinking we go down
There's a parking-
Treehouse and then to the right
Yeah,
there.
and there's a roadway
and the
up.
roadway up.
Just park in the roadway.
Right now, it kinda dead ends, like the
Yeah,
road would
the-
be
the
road
continuous.
does go up to,
There's a few parking spaces there,
Up the road, there is.
up the road there.
It is.
Yeah, presumably it'll be
You can get
plowed
off
if
the main
there's
one.
snow, I'm hoping there isn't, but if there is,
Yeah.
and bring our boot, we may have to bring our boots.
Will do.
Yeah, because I know you can get, this house is here, and then this whole, you can park.
That
in
was
this
the area I was thinking we would, yeah.
Park, because there is a gate, I think, up here.
Yep.
Who would have any knowledge about wetlands and such in any of these proposed areas? Probably,
Conservation Committee?
you know.
The Conservation Commission, generally you don't,
I'm pretty sure, I mean, this, like you said, there is hay bales here on that one,
I feel
and everything else has been
pretty
built upon
good
already.
about looking at that initially.
Well, the only property that it's really a question is gonna be the Highland Ave property.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Because that's a-
depositing of dredge spoils,
Well, the one question in my mind that I had was the low proximity to a stream on Oliver Street, and I don't know
yeah.
if there is, if it is proximate. Do you have any design of the site with a stream on it? Is that
The
one?
plan I had there was just the solar array portion.
Yeah.
So I mean, some of this is where,
How about, are we pulling up the state map, the state?
It looks like there's a stream in the back, that's, I'm assuming the
It's
blue
behind
line,
the
the blue
town
line
hall.
streams?
Behind the
Typically, yeah.
town
Yeah.
farm, there's one back there.
Just wanted to check. Yeah, there's a stream that there's a stream that's almost a natural border that abuts the solar array.
And I'd like to see that plotted on a map, if we could, because that, within 200 feet of that, if it's a perennial stream,
Yeah, I know there's water over it.
we can't really be working in that area within 200 feet without serious concerns. You can reduce it to 1,000 feet, 100 feet, but that requires special permission.
Yeah,
I really don't wanna go there if we don't have to. We wanna-
yep,
well,
and
anecdotally,
treehouses.
the landfill site's gonna be challenging. So I could see what we could pull together quick for a map, but if you're looking at the right side.
Yeah, that's what I was talking
Yeah,
about.
that's
It's a
where the
stream
water
that
And
has-
then there is a pocket of wetlands here
Right.
that's
Yeah.
indicative, you know, that is gonna be a
You know,
factor,
that's-
but
I'm
the
thinking-
site is completely wooded, so.
Well, that's- yeah.
And there's no current access point, so.
Right.
But
The,
there's no access
to
there.
keep it
No,
on.
Yeah.
there's no roadway.
Well, I think we
Right.
should look at it.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
But
absolutely.
that's- Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Treehouse is
But if
looking
you had,
really good.
if you had a map outlining the wetlands area on GIS, that would be helpful. And I guess the Boy Scout Park also.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would be,
Yeah,
water.
It's been 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue with that property is gonna be clearing it. Is all with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I'd love to go back there because I haven't
Yeah,
really
for
explored there, and I
nostalgia.
think there's a lot of opportunities.
Sometimes clearing can be achieved through harvesting of the trees. And
Mhm.
the cost of clearing really becomes the cost of removing the trees, and that's paid for, you actually can sell the trees,
Mhm.
depending on what's there.
Yeah,
We've done that, I've been involved in that,
It touches two
I'd look-
products.
depending on what's there.
Yeah.
And then the issue just becomes stumping.
mm-hmm,
And so maybe it's possible that the stumping cost can be offset by the income from the harvesting.
mm-hmm,
So I'm not initially as concerned about that issue as I am about the appropriateness of the site for a dog park. Otherwise, I may be wrong.
So I'll work on trying to get at least 2 revised maps and just like a condensed
11 by
version of those.
17.
Yep,
Yeah, that's
yep,
great.
yep. You gotta
Thank
run,
you.
I think.
So you think half an hour per site-ish, right?
Yeah,
So it's gonna be able to be
and
like,
it may, actually,
The drive
actually,
time.
you know, we might wanna start at that, reverse this and start at Parsons.
I was actually gonna suggest that, but I didn't want to.
Because, you know, I
So
think,
we
I'm
can kind of
reading
go
I'm reading your
from-
thoughts and I'm with you, we might wanna spend more time at the other sites.
Yeah,
And if there's public that's involved, I wouldn't wanna hold anybody up for that, because we might be looking at it for other than, for
It's still
purposes other
11:30?
than just,
Or is- yeah.
just the dog park.
So there is just a, a process that is common in this type of processes. I would encourage you to not necessarily immediately strike properties off the list. And that's a good thing for a consultant to assist with in the public to help determine and understand why things get taken off the list. So I think it's a hot, warm, and cold kind of scenario where if you only go in with one site because
Mhm.
everything else has been already eliminated.
I wasn't
then-
thinking of one, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
I was
so-
thinking
so, like,
it
I think we just wanna
needs
look
to
at
be at
the
least two.
Right.
we wanna look at the pros, the merits, and
Makes more
and
sense,
and
yeah.
the
Right.
drawbacks of any of
Right,
all of them.
right.
Yeah.
So like Parsons, you may get there. I spent some time just standing there wondering what it would be like, and it's close. It's in close proximity to residences,
Mhm.
but that shouldn't automatically remove it from a list. And
Right.
Highland Ave
Mhm.
is going to be potentially challenging for access purposes,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't necessarily be taken off the list because of that. I think it's going to be move them into the next stage, which is then have the consultant prepare the rough pros and cons or the costs, and I think that's going to help shape how people help evaluate and kind of get consensus towards moving towards one.
But
I think it's gonna-
Contrast, compare.
Yeah, compare and contrast.
Compare and
So
contrast.
just-
Yeah,
yeah.
we do that in showing houses. I understand, yes, I think you're right, in that
Okay.
concept. It's very helpful.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Any other thoughts?
No, I think this was great. I
All
think
right.
I appreciate your thoroughness.
No,
So, motion to
it's a
adjourn.
great idea. The
Yeah.
other thing was,
Yeah.
was there anything else on the general inventory that we had talked about that seems to make sense? We had received the inventory and the map
But I-
and the property list for the vehicles in the city. I
Oh,
didn't know
did
if
we
there
get
was-
those? Oh, we did, but then wasn't it like a little too nebulous and we were gonna pare it down?
Yep.
Right.
So, and I think this is plenty to work on right now, unless it's, I think there's a lot of merit. Well, first of all, we're gonna accomplish some of that task by going to these sites, right? Because these are city-owned properties, and I think that it's something to keep talking about. I think my input would be that this specific project is a little bit more time sensitive, and so I would say.
I just didn't know if we needed to keep that on the agenda, or we had achieved what we had wanted to achieve by having the inventory available.
My input would be that, I think that especially with seeing what's happening in the city right now and demand for space and development and, both in terms of developing municipal properties as well as private enterprises, that I think, I'd like to keep it on, because ultimately in the spring, I'd love to create like a top 10 list of available city property and do some site visits and really think creatively in conjunction with the planner, what could be potential uses for these and how we can, promote them or think about, development. That's and that was my intention in the first place, is, is there wasted space? Parking's an issue. Is there some place where we could have had a parking lot all along? We never thought about it. So that was my thought, if you're okay with that.
I don't have any objection to keeping it on the agenda.
And I can't volunteer to do this, but with the list has been refined to properties of a certain size and a certain value. There was a lot of very small parcels that would never achieve anything that would be usable.
Mhm.
So, again, I can't volunteer to do it, but an exercise that could be done if someone had time is to, using the GIS, you could at least go to each of these on the GIS and potentially create the,
Like the
the
maps
one-page
you made?
map, or,
I'd love to do it.
or the assessor's notes for it, which would give you a little bit more information that's listed here, and start to build this inventory to something a little bit more usable.
Is that an online tool?
What you would do is the GIS, if you haven't used it, you can search by the property address listed or the map and parcel number, and it brings you to the highlighted picture of the
Okay.
property. And then there's a pretty simple tool to print it as this kind of
Oh,
document.
I'd love to do that.
And then you would either print it or save it, and then you could build that list into
Yeah.
something where you have, there's 179 or some number on that list right now, so you would have a sheet for each one, which would at least give you a little bit more of a visual interpretation of the parcel. I just don't have the ability to volunteer to do that.
Right.
Yeah, I volunteer to do it, it's gonna take some time, I'm
Yeah.
happy to start compiling that for the sake of the committee.
Cool.
Where do I have that list?
I was just,
Oh,
delivering. I can
okay.
get that electronically.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But unfortunately, like, so the way it's set up is you can't, there's nothing clickable in this, but I have it digitally. It's in an Excel spreadsheet, so this is what the assessor put together.
And the land area is obviously acreage.
Yes.
Oh, there's so many, yeah. Oh, I really wanna get into this.
Good.
All right.
The map, when you see this map in color, you can zoom in, but it doesn't continue its scale, so it gets blurry at a certain point, but you will be able to get a sense of where some of these are.
Yeah, I think we've looked
at.
at, looked at this one before, yeah. Okay, great.
Great.
Motion to adjourn?
Is this second?
You can keep that in.
Oh,
Yep.
sure.
Aye.
Thank you, this concludes
Yes.
the property meeting, January 10th, 2019.